As tensions between Asia's two biggest economies continue to rise over disputed islands, we ask, could this long-standing dispute turn into a military confrontation? Who needs whom the most? And what impact will this territorial dispute leave on the two neighbouring countries? China, Japan, and the disputed islands. This is Inside Story. Hello from me, David Foster. The standoff between China and Japan over a small group of uninhabited islands in the East China Sea continues to escalate. Anti-Japanese rallies broke out in dozens of cities across China. Some became violent. The situation had been made worse when Japan announced it had bought several of the disputed islands from a private owner last week. Well, meanwhile, on Saturday, Beijing said it is conducting military drills near the islands, a day after sending 6 surveillance ships to, quote, show jurisdiction over the archipelago. The disputed islands, which are also claimed by Taiwan, were the focus of a major diplomatic row between Japan and China 2 years ago. But this time, neither side has indicated a willingness to compromise. From Hong Kong, our correspondent Margaret Ortigas reports.
A show of strength in the troubled East China Sea. Chinese state television ran this footage on Saturday of the Chinese Navy conducting live fire drills near a group of disputed islands. Japan bought the islands from a private owner last Tuesday. The territory in question is made up of uninhabited islets and rocks claimed by not just China and Japan, but also Taiwan. A 1968 study said the disputed chain potentially sits on rich oil reserves. Japan's purchase is seen by China as a highly provocative act, and swept by a wave of nationalism, people took to the streets across China to express their anger, attacking not just the Japanese embassy, but also Japanese shops, restaurants, and other establishments.
The least China wants is to go to war, but China would not like to be seen to be again sacrificing the territorial interests, because don't forget, for almost 2 centuries, China was under foreign aggression. So this sits very deeply in a Chinese psyche.
This is happening just as the U.S. is focusing its attention and its military on the Asia-Pacific region. As the largest and most powerful country in the area, economically and militarily, China is seen to be wanting to maintain its role in any potential power shift. Most of China's neighbors are allies of the United States, and analysts say that the U.S. pivot towards the Asia-Pacific is emboldening its allies to assert themselves and come out from under China's shadow. Any territorial disputes are a manifestation of a larger change taking place across the region. China has also been at odds with Southeast Asian countries over resource-rich islands in the South China Sea. There have been maritime standoffs and trade repercussions because of conflicting territorial claims. With China at the center of the region's economic development, its behavior has been seen as bullying by smaller countries in the dispute.
This is the classic security dilemma, which can easily escalate. And I think both sides and all countries need to look at the realities and try to find a way to maintain this balance.
A balance between nationalism and regional cooperation for mutual gains. The hope remains that is still possible, despite the guns being brought out for show. Margaret Ortigas for Inside Story, Hong Kong.
Despite being uninhabited, the islands themselves are at the heart of a territorial dispute, as we say, between China and Japan, an island chain in the East China Sea under Japanese control, but also claimed by China and Taiwan. The islands are known as Senkaku in Japan, Diaoyu in China, and Taiwan calls them Diaoyutai. The Senkakus have been under Japanese rule since 1895, when they were annexed from Taiwan. They are just 5 uninhabited islands and 3 barren rocks, but they are close to strategic shipping lanes and are thought to have large oil and gas deposits nearby, and are surrounded by rich fishing grounds. So could this long-standing territorial dispute turn into a major confrontation? To answer this question and others, of course, we're joined by our 3 guests in Hong Kong. Richard Hu, Associate Professor at the University of Hong Kong. In New York, Mark Seldon, Senior Research Associate in the East Asia Programme at Cornell University, and in Tokyo via broadband, we're joined by Tomohiko Taniguchi, a guest professor at Japan's Keio University. And Ms. Taniguchi, also the former spokesman for the Japanese Foreign Ministry. Very warm welcome to each one of you. Mark Seldon, first of all, in New York. What is this dispute really about?
Well, I think we can say that it is about the future of East Asia at a time in which we're seeing major changes in the power structure of the region. Those changes include a decline in American power. They include a rise in Chinese power. It includes insecurity on the part of Japan in the face of those two developments. And it includes a series of territorial conflicts, of which we're here to talk about one today, in the Senkaku or Diaoyutai Islands. But we can locate that in the context of a series of other territorial disputes. Japan and Korea over Dokdo, Takeshima, China in the South China Seas, involved in disputes with the Philippines and Vietnam, Japan in disputes over the northern islands with Russia. So we have a series of territorial disputes, all magnified by the recent coming into effect of the United Nations Convention on the Law of the Seas, which makes these tiny uninhabited islands or even rocks priceless, valuable, not only because there is oil and fishing, but also because they come with 200 nautical miles of territory. A complete reorganization of the seas in this way. And Japan is a major winner in this. China is a major loser. So the tensions are high and the issues are large.
Well, let's put a couple of those points to Richard Hu, talking to us from Hong Kong. There's a report that says China will need to import 6 million barrels of oil a day by 2020. We know these areas have got mineral wealth in and around them. And as Mark Seldon was explaining, there are other territorial disputes as well. What right, for example, does China have to say islands, the Spratlys and Paracels, which are 1,200 kilometres away from China, close to Malaysia, Borneo and Vietnam. What right has China got to expand its sphere of influence that far, does it believe?
Let me pick up what Mark has just said. I think the current dispute is about the future of East Asia. I agree with that. But also I want to add something. It is also about domestic politics in Japan and also in China. Japan now is in the process of leadership election and transition, and the same as in China, leadership transition. So this episode actually is caused by on the Japanese side by Ichihara's proposal to purchasing these islands from the private owners, and then the Japanese government stepped in. So this is triggered a series of events. Now for the Chinese, they have to respond. So this is a new round of controversial or the confrontation over the Diaoyu Island. So now back to your questions. I think, yes, China have similar problems in South China Sea with several other claimant countries over Spratly and over other islands in the South China Sea. It is important for China to reassert its sovereignty claims over the islands because of domestic politics reasons, and also the potential.
But what sovereignty claims does China have over the Spratlys and Paracels when they are 1,200 kilometres away from the mainland?
Basically, based on the historical claim, China argued they discovered the island first, and also nobody claimed the sovereignty when China did. Not until the 1970s, until the oil and other mineral resources were discovered. So China says we had a control over the South China Sea, so we had the right over them.
Tomohiko Taniguchi talking to us from Tokyo. In a sense, Japan can ill afford this, given its parlous economic state. Exports of motor vehicles last year down by 10.6% on the year before. And China is the biggest market for Japanese exports. So is this about playing to domestic political consumption with elections coming up?
I don't deny that there is a factor like that. But I have been under the impression that the Chinese have been pushing the envelope to all direction. So the question, what this row is all about, can be answered by pointing out that there seems to be a clear strategy on the part of the Chinese to make the East and South China Seas as if their own, Lake Beijing, let's call it. And the first island chain, so-called, that stretches from the Japanese archipelago, Okinawa, Taiwan, Philippines, they say should be extended to include the larger area, which is called the second island chain. So that push coming from China is being felt here in Japan, but elsewhere in Asia, like Indonesia, Vietnam, Philippines. And this is all about the security and the freedom of passage, maritime security. That's why this is pretty much a security issue seen from my side.
Well, let's talk about the security issues, the international dimensions of this. Going to bring in, first of all, something the US government said in 1995 in a report, maintaining freedom of navigation is a fundamental interest of the United States. And then in the last few hours, talking from Tokyo, the US Defense Chief Leon Panetta has expressed his concern about what's going on, saying, "I'm concerned that when these countries engage in provocations of one kind or another over these various islands, that it raises the possibility that a misjudgment on one side or the other could result in violence and could result in conflict. And that conflict would then have the potential of expanding." Is this, Mark Seldon, what the real concern is?
Well, I think it certainly is the most immediate concern. I think that it's useful for us to talk today both about the immediate crisis and the long-term possibilities. And so far, we've been concentrating on the crisis fairly enough. And I'd like to talk about it, the point you raised with respect to the Senkaku issue, and then to think about whether there are larger issues that ought to attract our attention if we're interested in thinking about solutions. In terms of Senkaku, it seems to me that the ways in which the press has handled this, and certainly all of the commentary coming out of Japan, but also the Anglophone press, has framed this almost exclusively in terms of the expansion of Chinese power. And my own view is that when we look at the Southeast Asia, the South China Sea cases, that this makes a lot of sense. But when we think about the Senkakus and a number of other issues, it's a much more complicated case. It's more complicated because Beijing has, for several decades, made its claim to the Senkakus. Deng Xiaoping, in one of his wiser moments, suggested, and both China and Japan followed his suggestion, that issues that couldn't be resolved, such as the territorial rights to the Senkaku, be shelved, and the two countries get on with issues of mutual agreement, such as trade.
But if I may butt in just for a moment,
until fairly recently.
Could I just put this one to you? I mean, we're talking about the wider implications here. If you have the U.S. Defense Secretary saying, "Be very careful, everybody," what concerns are there for the United States, and what possibility of wider international involvement in this?
Sorry, I was slow in getting there, but I am getting there. The immediate issue is this. When the Senkaku dispute broke in 2010, you recall the Chinese sea captain twice ramming into the Japanese ship, immediately Japan's foreign minister raced to Washington and demanded or pressed Secretary Hillary Clinton to announce that the United States would take this issue with the utmost seriousness, and it would defend Japan under the AMPO Treaty. Now, we don't actually know what Secretary Clinton said, but we do know what the foreign minister said. And he said that Clinton gave that assurance. At the same time, U.S. spokesman said that the question of sovereignty of Senkaku is something the United States will not intervene in. So we have a series of slightly contradictory claims, but Japan claiming United States support. So from the beginning, the United States was drawn in to the Senkaku issue. And the question of the outcome there is very much a question of the U.S.-Japan relationship at a time of conflict with China. And we see a number of areas in which
need to move this on a little bit, if I may.
Is being tightened.
Richard Hu in Hong Kong, is the Chinese government encouraging this? We've got a trade minister saying it's going to be hard to avoid negative consequences for Sino-Japanese relationship. We have hundreds of thousands of internet bloggers in China saying, look, we must protest, and the Chinese government, which could stop this, not doing anything to prevent it. Is it happy to see public concern demonstrated on the streets in the way that it is and effectively encourage what's happening?
To some degree, Chinese government cannot control it. And this episode, I think, I think China is provoked by the recent action by the Japanese government and also by the Tokyo Mayor Ichihara's proposal. Now, the things on the street, I think, it's pretty much spontaneous by the ordinary citizens.
Well, and yet,
a
lot of commentators are suggesting that these people could never have got that number of banners, thousands and thousands and thousands of banners ready in such a short time, that there must have been some kind of officialdom behind this.
I don't think the government involved in mobilize these people, but these people this time is not banned or prohibited by the government. This is something you don't see in before. And so this is kind of way to pressure the Japanese side to come to the negotiation table. And the other things I want to pick up what Mark have said is from Chinese perspective, there's no link between the South China Sea dispute and the current Diaoyu dispute. China tried to separate these two things. And I don't think this is simply because China have a grand strategy trying to expand or is pushing its maritime sphere and challenging Japan. But this time it's simply provoked by the Ichihara's proposal.
Tomohiko Taniguchi, the news came out on Chinese state radio several hours ago that 1,000 fishing boats are expected to be moved into the waters around these disputed islands within the next week. How do you think the Japanese authorities will respond to that?
I'll answer that question shortly afterwards, but let me just say it is not a peaceful demonstration that you're now looking at in China. Thousands of people looted a couple of supermarkets run by the Japanese capital. One of the major factories of Panasonic was completely destroyed. It is an act of violence, pure and simple. And to answer your question, this is one of the scary, scary scenarios. Hundreds of boats seem to be coming over to the Senkaku area, backed and supported by the force. It could be Coast Guards, it could be Navy of the Chinese People's Liberation Army, but the confrontation has been escalated purely from the Chinese side. And because of the constitutional limitation on the Japanese side, they cannot shoot one single bullet. Indeed, the Japanese military has never shot even a bullet throughout the post-war history. So it's going to be in a reactive fashion. And what sort of provocation that the Chinese are willing to do over to the Japanese side is a case in point. I have to beg the Chinese side to be restrained.
But there is Mark Seldon, let me come to you, history involved in this. Tomohiko Taniguchi saying no shots been fired in anger since the end of the Second World War. But Tuesday, I think, of next week, we have the anniversary of what's called the Mukden incident, going way back, 1930-31, I think, which led to Japan's invasion of Manchuria. So there's a history of resentment between them.
Mm-hmm. Indeed. One of the problems in resolving issues of this kind, which we're just talking about a few rocks, a few tiny islands. One of the problems in resolving the issues is the latent anger, not just involving China, but involving Korea, involving other victims of Japan's advance earlier. And these issues underlie, I would say, the response, including violent responses that have broken out in China recently. Of course, Japan is also involved in demonstrations. It's also involved in sending ships to the Senkakus to claim those territories over recent years. But one of the issues that makes it difficult to resolve them is the lingering animosity going back to the war years. Well, how can we turn this around? Is there a kind of handle that we can begin to think about? I think that both China and Japan need the help, all the help they can get of others who recognize that the future of the East Asian region can be one of harmony, of prosperity, of mutual economic interchange, and so forth, and that the issues that we're talking about are small compared with the very large stakes that each of these countries have.
The difficulty China's authorities often have in going looking for outside help. Richard Hu, let me ask you this in Hong Kong. Would the authorities in Beijing be prepared to see anybody else get involved in mediating this dispute?
I think if anybody else can mediating, it's a welcome. But I think the Beijing does not expect anybody will effectively mediating this. This is, to the end, should be something resolved by the two governments in Tokyo and in Beijing. So now China is, I think, putting more pressure on Tokyo to come to the negotiation table.
Well, China is suggesting there should be negotiations about this, is it?
For the first, at least Japan should acknowledge this is a dispute issues over the sovereignty over these Diaoyu Islands. Japan so far does not acknowledge or recognize there's a dispute. This is something, first step, the two governments should have some consensus on this. And this is the first step. And then next step is how we back to the status quo before and how we normalize the relations, over these disputes.
Well, Mr. Taniguchi, the suggestion there is that it's the Japanese government being intransigent in this matter and that it's time for it to sort of ease up on nationalist pride. Is there anything to suggest that your country will back down, that is prepared to compromise on the ownership of these islands?
That the Chinese side has been making a request to Japan to come to the negotiation table has come to me as a total news. I have never heard of such a thing, because the Chinese position is, because this is an internal affair and the Senkakus or Diaoyu wholly belong to China, there is nothing to be done from outside because this is ours. That's their attitude. So it would be very much surprising if the Chinese would say, let's bring in the third party as an arbitrator. I think that's the least thing that will happen. So while at the same time I can understand that the Beijing authority feels shakier than ever before because they are undergoing a huge transition politically, and no tension for them must be welcome. So that's the opportune time for the Japanese side to grab. Let's calm down together, and you're going to have the new leadership, and let's just talk about the future. And to come back to the status quo as suggested by our colleague from Hong Kong would mean that put Senkaku Islands as it is, which is that under the firm control of the Japanese government. I'm not sure if that would suffice the Chinese leaders, but that seems to be the way out.
Well, mediation in any shape or form does seem to be a long way off, and we can't continue our debate any longer, I'm sad to say. Thank you to our guests on this edition of Inside Story in Hong Kong, Richard Hu in New York, Mark Seldon, and in Tokyo via broadband, Tomohiko Taniguchi. Thank you too very much for joining us on this edition of Inside Story. Do send us your feedback. Email your thoughts to us at insidestory@aljazeera.net. From everybody here, from me, David Foster, and the rest of the Inside Story team, thanks for watching. See you next time. Bye-bye for now.